Welcome to our midweek. Happy July. Happy 4th of July tomorrow, everybody. Can't believe we're halfway through this year. As you can see, we're doing something a little different this week. Got Pastor Carson with me today.
Hey, buddy.
Hey, man. How you doing?
I've got coffee, and it's almost the 4th of July, so I'm feeling pretty good. I'm feeling pretty good right now.
Right. We're halfway through the summer. Hard to believe. School starts in a month, August 1st. Wow. We're already back to talking about kids going back to school even and getting ready for that. So hard to believe.
Yeah.
So, hey, just so everybody knows, again, Pastor Ken Hubbard was there this past Sunday. That was great, amazing. If you did not get to see that in-house, I told y'all last week you didn't want to miss it if you were in town. You need to go watch it. So take the time to go watch Pastor Ken. He brought an amazing word, and trust me, you're going to want to go back and watch it if you haven't seen it, and maybe just rewatch it anyway because it was that good. So
it was fantastic.
Yeah, it was great. So Carson and I are going to kind of tag team this week. If you like sports talk radio, I love it. Sports talk TV, I'm into sports. I'm a huge sports guy. So kind of a PTI, part of the interruption style. We're going to kind of go back and forth, just asking each other questions and kind of talking about where we've been and what's coming up in the book of 1 Corinthians. So you ready, man?
Dude, I'm ready. I'm excited. Thanks for having me on this. This is kind of cool. It's like being an inside track in baseball because I've been the one speaking most of these, so I get the opportunity to kind of like be a part of the conversation now. So I'm ready. Let's go.
All right, let's do this. Well, let's real quick where we've been. We spent a couple of weeks on Unity, and Pastor Craig kicked that one off, and then you kind of tag teamed that with him and closed that section out. Then we had a hot week on sex, a hot topic, right? And then week before this past Sunday, and talked a lot about holiness. And so that's kind of where we've been on Sundays, and a lot of the same type of topics in our midweek discussions: unity, sex. Last week I kind of deviated a little bit and did meat sacrifice to idols and talking about our rights, right? And how not demanding our rights. So that's kind of where we've been. Like you said, you've been preaching. So most of this, what has stood out to you most so far in your study of this book as you've been preparing for your sermons, as whether it's past or what's coming up, what stood out to you most so far?
I think the biggest thing is this church. When we look at this church, it just seems to be very foreign, and it reads like it was just like it. Like I've said, it reads like a penthouse letter with everything that's going on. But what's so interesting is, and we're going to talk about it a little bit this week, and what we've seen through it is Paul was really trying to get this church to really create some type of separation from the people that they were living around. He wasn't trying to as much as to alienate people. He really was just trying to find ways that they could be separate. And so like with the eating of meat and the way they would do worship, he was trying his best to give them tools to help them get through stuff. So that's probably been the biggest, is just, we don't attach that in our society, but we do it all the time. We, if we've got an addiction, we work with recovery groups, or we put safe, keywords in our phones, or we let people into our struggles. But it's the same way with our friend groups. Like if you have a problem with a friend, you talk to that friend, you communicate. So that's been, I think, what's so interesting is I read this book years ago and have continued to study it. And I thought of it as being this just really wicked church. And it's really it's kind of like the modern church now. We have to accept there are things in the process that we have to do that it may seem crazy to other people, but if, and we're going to get into it, if what you wear to church and the conversations you have and the different things you do, if those things are what you need to do to make the change so that you can keep growing, then it's not bad. So I think that's the thing that has been the most interesting for me. For you guys listening, what's been the biggest thing as you've studied it and led these companion pieces? What's the one thing, I guess, from the first 4 weeks has been just like, oh, wow, this is something I didn't really think about, or it was something, a new revelation from this reading?
So for me, I'm gonna tag off on our theme verse, right? 1 Corinthians 4:14. Okay. I'm not writing this to embarrass or to shame you, but to correct you as children I love, right? It is a parently letter, very much so.
Yeah.
But if you miss that verse, if you read right over that verse, you can walk out of this book and almost like an old school church, right? Where you feel
Mhm.
worse walking out on Sunday than you did walking in.
Exactly. Yes.
And so, and I'll be honest, you know this about me. And I don't know how many of y'all know, I, I've been to seminary, right? I've got a
Mhm.
master's degree, and that's been a new revelation to me, as we read this book. I've read this book. So, um, just having that idea of a parent, but sorry, can you hear that? Do we need to hit a
I can,
pause?
yeah. You're
Okay.
good. No, you're good.
All right. So my dog's in the floor over here. He's actually barking at his toy in the floor and playing. And so, um, but you know, but that's been the biggest thing I think for me. And
Mhm.
the midweek on the sex, right? I really hit that because, like you just said a minute ago, if that's something you deal with, there
Mhm.
is so much shame wrapped up
Mhm.
in that, right? I
Yeah.
mean, people keep that as a secret, and they don't want people to know what they're, because there's so much shame. I mean, my mom recently told me a story of a youth pastor who was getting ready to kind of ascend to the senior pastor level of a church,
Yeah.
and then got arrested for pornography related stuff that's illegal.
Yeah.
And how that, we recently heard the story of a very famous pastor. I won't mention his name on here, but
Mhm.
has written books and just had to step down from ministry for something that happened back in the 1980s, right?
Mhm.
And so, there, all of this stuff is going on, and yet Paul's like, it's not to shame.
Mhm.
It's to correct you. I want to bring you. This is like a parent. My dad said to me, yeah, I was of the generation that got spanked. So, this hurts me more than it hurts you. It's not
Mhm.
meant to do right, to be that I want to make you feel bad. I'm correcting you in love.
Yeah, and you say this, and it's true. This reads like you are the worst of the worst of the worst.
Yeah.
And I think Paul's heart, and I believe it's the same heart that Jesus has for us. And I know you know this. And if you're watching this and you don't wrap your mind around this, culture is never going to love you
No,
like
never.
Jesus loves you. It's
Nope.
never. You're in a your definition of success, your wealth, your affluence, whatever you have, it's never going to do it. And so I think this letter just proves the fact that we get so caught up in that shame, right? Because
Yeah.
we live in a cancel culture now. We
Oh,
live in a
so
culture
much.
that is, oh, it just, whatever you did or whatever skeletons are in your closet. But I think it's interesting that the Corinthians they exemplified this, not the people in the church so much, but the culture around them. Right?
Hmm.
They were excited about it. Right? They the way abortions were done in Corinth. And I don't, we don't have to get too deep into that, but
Right.
it was we get all bent out of shape about how abortions are done now. Read some of the history behind that. It was brutal. I mean, ripping babies out of the womb, killing the moms, to kill the
Yep.
babies, just
Baby.
these awful, horrible things that were happening. And all Paul's trying to do is just encourage them because, and this is the secret, I think, of Christianity that a lot of people miss. You can't become a hermit in a Jonestown, Waco, Texas, Branch Davidians
Yep.
community. It
Yep.
doesn't work
Work.
because every time you do that, and you know this, you get into a one single mindset. And we talked about this in the first week with unity and church people and divisions. If you're leaning on the denominations around you to keep you from falling, hey, if it keeps you going, thumbs up. I'm happy for you. But that's not going to hold up in every battle. It's just not. The
It's not.
truth of Jesus Christ will, and you can't get so surrounded and avoid it. So
Yeah.
I think you're
Yeah.
right. When Paul writes this and is saying, "Hey, I'm not trying to scold you," he's really encouraging them. And you can't leave. Like you can't get
Right.
out of this. You can't walk away from this culture. You can move, but Corinth is going to follow you, and it
Yeah.
follows us now. It's wherever we
So,
go.
so shift gears just a little bit, but kind of still in that same vein, right? I heard a story. A good friend of mine from South Point, right? Um, Left South Point after first service and went to her grandmother's old church
Okay.
because it was their normal homecoming weekend. And she was telling me this story, me and my wife, this story after we met up for lunch afterwards. And it was their normal homecoming Sunday. It was, they ended up not having homecoming because there was only like 30 people there, right? And an older church, most of the people there over 50. But the pastor was giving this illustration that basically, if you've got sin in your life, don't come to church. You got to go get that sin fixed first before you come to church. And it was the point that he was making. And we're like, oh my God, really? And yet, so we still struggle with this as a culture, as a whole, as the capital C church, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of this, like Paul, trying to get the sin out of the church, but yet not kicking the people out of the church, right?
Yeah.
And so how do we do that? How do we kind of get from 1 Corinthians, where Paul's not, other than the guy who was caught living in open sin by sleeping with his mother-in-law or a stepmom, sorry, right? Other than that guy for obvious reasons, but how did we get to this place where capital C churches like, no, you got to get your life fixed first, and that's never Jesus' point. Jesus' point is, and Paul's point is, come. This is the place where you find healing. This is the place where you get over that stuff.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think it's two things, and I think it's shown through at least the first 7 chapters of the book of 1 Corinthians, and really before it gets into the love verse. And I know Pastor Craig is going to talk about that in a couple of weeks. The first thing is, it is seeing people for the best they can be, not just where they are. We get so caught up in, we hate the sin, love the sinner.
Yeah.
You don't. When you feel that way, you hate the sinner and you hate the sin, because we are all sinners. We are unable to do right. We have the capacity to do good through the power of Jesus Christ. That's it. But we were born sinners. We're carrying it with us. And so you have to love people enough to see where they could be, right? If you look at an addict in the heat of their addiction and all you see is the addict, you don't see where they could be, you don't see the healing that could happen, then you've already accepted that they'll never be anything anymore. So you have to love people beyond what you see right now. And the second thing, and this is the part of it that I think it's really crucial, is Christians need to be starting to be honest with one another, but they don't need to be mean. We didn't get too much into this last week, or 2 weeks ago, but I wanted to save it for this. There is a difference between a call out and a cast out. When Jesus talked about, when he started talking about fighting people in the church, right? Because Jesus brought this up. He said, well, what if, the Sadducees and the Pharisees tried to trick him and say, what if there's an argument within the brothers and sisters of who you're dealing with? And he responds with, have it be a one-on-one conversation and deal with the insurrection, the affair, the gossip, the idolatry, whatever it is. It's 1-to-1. Then it's 1-1 and the pastor. Then it's 1-1 the pastor and a group of leaders. And then, only then, if there is no repentance, it's never said that you cast them out, but and you keep that branding that's who they are. Where we've twisted it as the big church is, first off, we don't do a one-on-one. We call people out on the carpet. We go to step 4, and we don't do the one-on-one. And I think the reason Jesus does this, I know you and I've had this conversation. When you do that, and anyone watching, if you do a one-on-one conversation with somebody, unless they are just completely gone, they're actually probably going to be more willing to hear where you are. You may not walk away agreeing, you may not walk away being friends, but I feel like you can find some middle ground. And so 100%. We as the big church, we got to figure out a way to start calling people out kindly, nice, adding grace, and not cast them to the side. That's the part. I think that's the part of it I think Paul was doing that with what he was doing here in the church, was just trying to get them to recognize where they were and to tell them, hey, this is the only hope you have. When you're living in Corinth and you're living in literally Sin City all the time, the church is the only place you're going to find that peace. It's the only place you're going to find people that love you enough to be where you are. And I think that's just such a beautiful part of it. As the Big C church, I think that's our first 2 steps.
No, I completely agree. And you referenced the steps of Jesus in my lifetime, right? I just turned 47.
Almost a big 50, baby.
I know. As I said, almost. I still got 3 years. Let's not get there too fast. But I've only seen that happen one time. in my entire life.
Mm.
I've seen that process happen one time. And it was a man who was very much in the wrong and refused to acknowledge it and refused to acknowledge the sin and the hurt that he was causing. But even Jesus closes that section out, right? To your point, doesn't really say cast them out, but he's almost like, yeah, put them out, what, for the hopes that that separation
Yes.
brings them back.
Yes.
It's not so that they're gone permanently. The goal is always reconciliation, both to one another and to God.
Yeah. Well, if you're branded as a gossip, and you know, like we know this in church, if you're branded as a gossip, which, you know, or a sexual deviant or whatever you want to do, right? You can put in whatever. If everyone knows that about you and we've had conversations about it and we've encouraged you and we've done everything we can and we've followed the steps that Jesus says to do with believers, which is a huge part of this, where
Yep.
you can't do this with people that don't believe. People that don't believe, they don't live under the same kind of ideas, they don't live under the same relationship, they don't look at the rules, if we want to call it that, of Christianity. They don't. So you can't tell somebody who speaks Greek how to speak English, right?
Yeah,
And talk to
right.
them in English. You have to teach them. And so the issue is that if you are known as a gossip, we've gone through all these steps, then people are not going to tell you things if you're a gossip. If
Right.
people know that you have a drinking issue, they're not going to put you in situations for you to get drunk.
Right.
And the hope that Jesus has is that, like the prodigal son, go back to the pig pen, go back to your addiction, go back to your gossip, go back to all the things that you're going to do and see if they bring you the level of joy, peace, and happiness that you once had in this community.
Yeah.
And you know, that's a great, I think that's the segue into why we have holes in our holiness, because there's so many of us that are mad. We got church hurt, or we're
Yep.
angry about something that was
Yep.
said, and we leave and we hope that people chase after us. We hope that the church will chase after you, but it's you that needs to run after Christ, and the church will walk beside you. And
Yeah.
the church should always be there to welcome you back. But once that happens, there is that moment of saying, okay, I'm going to work through the things that I've done. I'm going to acknowledge what I've done and go through it, because it's no different than if you, and I hate to say it this way, but it's so true. It is if you commit a crime. If you commit a crime and you say, I'm completely, exonerated, I've gone through the process, I've done my time, I'm a different person. Okay, only time will tell. If your heart has changed, then your spirit and what you do, well, if you were once a gossip and you're no longer a gossip, you won't be gossiping anymore. And so I think that's so big of it, but the fact that 47 years of life and you've only seen this conversation once. Yeah. So try having it one-on-one. I mean, just try that. And I think even pastors out there, like pastors, start loving your people one-on-one enough to not just cast them out. Get into the hard situations, because that's what the church in Corinth was doing. They were dealing with some small, easy stuff, but to them, it was crucial because of where they lived, right? And I know you've got some of the stuff that we talked about, right? We talked about with the lawsuits and the sacrificing to meat and all these different things, right? It's just, yeah.
Which I think, so let's kind of go there. You brought up the sermon on holes in your holiness, right? And so in 1 Corinthians 3 verses 1 and following, right, Paul starts off with that whole, I can't really talk to you like I want to talk to you because you're still on spiritual milk when you should be on meat by now. Yeah. And it kind of talks about, so he's talking about spiritual growth, right? And I think that's kind of that next segment here is, as we've been talking about this, it's a lot of it, I think, has to do because people aren't growing spiritually like they should be. We're stuck. There is a tendency among Christians, people in general, if we're just being honest, but since we're talking about spiritual things, we'll talk about Christians, to want to be spoon fed, right? And you see it even, again, outside the church with the news. Just tell me the news. I don't want to go research for myself and find out what's true. I just believe whatever you tell me, right? So, it's, we have this feeling of, I want to come to church. I want to be spoon fed. I don't want to study on my own. I don't want to go through the steps. So, I think that's also why we struggle at South Point, or any church for that matter, right? Of getting
Yeah.
small group leaders and people who are spiritually mature enough to do that. Oh, I don't, or people always, well, I don't know that that's, I don't think I'm spiritually mature enough for that, or I don't think I'm gifted for that, or whatever however they want to phrase it, right? Or why they're not willing to come down and be on that prayer team that's at the cross on Sunday mornings, or because they're not spiritually mature enough, right? We have to have spiritually mature people. So how do we break out of that tendency? How do we, grow to get to that spiritual meat, and not just stay constantly on the milk and being spoon fed?
I love it. So last week or 2 weeks ago, when I referenced the kind of the training program to a stronger faith,
Yep.
The part about growing your spirit incrementally, right? Adding weights, right? You start off with a bench press, you go 100 pounds, then you work to 105, 110, you grow the weight, in increments.
Yep.
It also means challenging yourself that maybe you don't understand everything about faith. And maybe there are different perspectives about faith that you should actually encourage. One of my favorite books, I read it every single year. I cannot stress it enough. It is a little bit confusing, but it's so beautiful, is The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis. It's a fantastic book. It's wonderful. And it's this beautiful illustration of getting on a bus and people in the town going to heaven. And at the very end of the book, I'm not going to spoil it, but it's this beautiful representation of people struggling to let go of the things that have held them back in hell. And they just can't let go of what they need to let go to get into heaven. And there's some stuff in there that's super. I mean, there's a guy battling with his addiction of sin. There's a guy battling his pride. There's a guy angry because he went to jail because a buddy of his committed a murder that he was a part of. One that I think sticks out to me that is so tough is a mom that dies, and she cannot enter into heaven because she cannot let go of the pain and the guilt of losing her infant son. And it took her, and this anger and this hatred, it drowned her down. And so I say that to say that this whole experience of life is about growing and realizing what is the focus of everything that you are doing.
Yeah.
If you're just content to just keep being spoon fed by things that are happening, then you won't ever find that growth. And so it really is about, it's acknowledging everything, right? We say, God, I give you everything. Okay. God, I give you my children. Do you really?
Yeah.
Do you really? I give you my finances. Do you really? Do you truly trust that if God came in like he did with Abraham in the Old Testament, right? And these are stories, these are beautiful historical stories about God's provision. He says, I'm going to make your nation the nation of mine through your children, but I need you to kill your son. What do you do? Like, what do you do in that moment?
What are you doing?
How do you trust that moment? So it's all of these things in our faith that grow. And so you want to get into having meat. You want to end up being able to have more than being spoon fed. You have to become more teachable. And that means expressing the fact that you may not understand things yet. I said it when I gave this sermon, I don't get Leviticus yet, or Revelation scares me. I'm going to figure those books out when I go to heaven, but that doesn't mean I'm going to put them on the shelf and never read them forever. I can read them, and I can take the interpretation of we're going to lose our bodies. Christ is going to come back and reign for 1,000 years, and then he's going to call the elect, and then he's going to have the lake of fire, and there's going to be, I can read all of this for as it is, or I can read it as in use of an illustration or a parable, but I'm still stretching myself. Yeah. Where we get frustrated is we get so stretched, and then we say, oh, I can't do it because it scares us. It's like, faith is scary sometimes.
It is. And I think for me, I'll give you an illustration for me, right? The denomination I grew up in, and I'm going to use a denomination air quotes because technically it's not, there's no denominational headquarters, but it's most people view it as such because they don't know that. But growing up in that, again, going through their Bible colleges for my degrees, there were, and we'll get into a lot more of this. I'll tease it a little bit here as we get into the spiritual gift stuff, right? There were certain views on spiritual gifts that frankly don't align with where I'm at today, with where South Point is today. One reason I'm not a part of that denomination anymore, right, but if without that willingness to study, without that willingness to look and say, what have I been taught, and is it accurate? Is it the
Yeah.
most accurate interpretation? Not to saying that those people are bad people, that they're not interpreting it the best way that they know how, but again, is that really what I believe, or if I'm just going to take it at face value and be spoon fed, and even though I've got these degrees, and just have it forced down my throat and then regurgitate it to everybody around me, right?
Yeah. It's the idea that you could learn something even when you're 50, even when you're 60,
Yes.
even when you're 70. That's the thing about faith that I think, and especially in any religion, but specifically Christianity, because it's the only one that's true. I'm just going to be honest. The problem is that we get so caught up and so frustrated with the fact that we could be, one, wrong, or
Yep.
two, that the denomination we have committed ourselves to through our life could be wrong or could be
Yep.
different. I grew up as a Lutheran, man. Like, do you like the fact there's so many holes in what I believe as a Lutheran child? That's unbelievable. If for anyone out there, you know anything about the Lutheran faith, just go Google it. We had no idea about works. It was just grace. It was just grace will descend and be. But I love that there's a growth process, and that's the part of it. Are you willing to stay where you are? If you're willing to stay where you are, here's the beautiful thing. Jesus will still love you. You are still going to be heaven bound. If you believe that Jesus Christ came, lived, died, rose, and saved you, you're going to heaven. But there will be things in your life that keep you from seeing all that you could be if you are using denominational or religion or religiosity
Mhm.
terms to keep you there. If you need, I don't need to have anybody around me that drinks. Cool. If I
Yep.
don't want to use these spiritual gifts. Cool. You will still be heaven bound, but you will have a life here that you won't feel like is as joyful. And
It
it's
won't be
not,
as
doesn't
full
mean
as
one's
Christ
right.
intended.
Exactly. And there's nothing that you're wrong. It's not that you're done. It's not that you're dumb. It's that, are you allowing yourself to be stretched? Right.
Yep. Yep.
Best challenge I ever got from one of my mentors was, believe what you believe so much about your faith that you can't be convinced it's wrong.
Hmm.
Believe what you believe about your faith so you can't be convinced it's wrong. I still have things in it I don't understand, but I'm holding on to it because I haven't found
Hmm.
anything else that holds on. And
Hmm.
I like to yell at people and tell them I'm a crazy reformist. I got a dash of Lutheran, a dash of Presbyterian, a whole bunch of like non-denom AG in
Oh,
there, and just spin it up. So yeah, dude, I completely
that's
agree.
crazy.
Can you stay where you are? Yes, Jesus will still
Yes.
love you. But I do
Yes.
think you will miss out on so much,
So
especially when
much.
PC gets into spiritual gifts in a couple weeks. There are going to be people that I really believe are just going to be blown away because you just don't get it. You don't understand it, and that's okay. And whether you're 20 or 90, you have a chance to step in and really learn something about yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. All right. I know you and I can sit here. We could probably go on another hour and a half like this,
We
right? I
could.
mean,
Yeah,
we really could.
we could.
But we want to be mindful of everybody's time. So let's talk a little bit about what's upcoming. I got one more question for you, and we'll close out with that. But coming up this Sunday, you're speaking, or we're going to
I
kind of
am.
jump over the spiritual gifts, and get to the resurrection life. You
Mm-hmm.
want to kind of tease that a little bit?
Yeah. Two things. It is the longest chapter and the longest verses in all of First Corinthians. It's 58 chapters. There's 58 verses. 58 verses about the resurrection. I think that's very intentional, and I think it's very unique because it is the longest account of why the resurrection is so important in Scripture.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. It's really unique
Mhm.
that Paul ends this letter on that. He could have ended it on a million different things, but he ends it on the resurrection, and
Yeah.
it is the longest. And the second thing about it, um, everybody has their own interpretation of what is going to happen when you die.
Yeah.
And I really believe that there is one true way. I'm not going to share my belief because I don't know if it's the true way. It's the one that brings me the most comfort. But I will say that in studying this, we skip over the fact that death is inevitable.
Mm.
I think Christians as a whole fear death way too much. And I'm not saying we got to be those people that welcome death and like, oh, we can't wait for it to happen. No, if you feel that way, speak to somebody. Don't feel that way. But if death is so fearful for you, do you really hold on to the resurrection? Because just like how an acorn becomes an oak tree,
Great.
the acorn has to die. The acorn has to be buried. It has to be nurtured. It has to become dormant, and it has to die. But its DNA is the same as the oak tree. So those are my two little teasers.
That's awesome.
I hope everybody is excited for it, because it's personally, honestly, it's been my favorite chapter that I've read from this letter.
Yeah.
So,
and I think another reason it's important, and I don't know if you're going to talk about this, and if hopefully I'm not giving away too much, but if you watch that video, any of you out there that I referenced in the week 2 of these midweeks, of the Bible Project and their overview, right? The resurrection is why all these little mini essays that Paul's been writing throughout this book, whether it's unity, whether it's sex, whether it's the food cycle, it's because of the resurrection, right? That is the underlying reason that the things are the way that he's writing about it. To your point, he could have ended anywhere, but he closes it with, it's all because of the resurrection.
Yeah, it's unbelievable how much of it he ties back to that, and we'll get into it Sunday, man. There are parts of this I cannot encourage everybody enough. Watch, however you got to ingest chapter 15. There are so many verses. There are verses in this chapter that have created denominations. There are chapters in this that are interpreted so much. I mean, just not bashing anybody, but the Mormons, they take, I think it's verses 20 through 29 in such a very unique way about baptism in the dead that it's beautiful. And so, yeah, it's going to be a good Sunday.
Yeah. Read it. Read your Bible. As Pastor Craig says, read your Bible.
Read your Bible.
Read your Bible. All right. So after this Sunday, Pastor Craig will be back on
he will.
The 14th. And he is going to come back. We're going to circle back then to spiritual gifts. And we will have 2 weeks on spiritual gifts. Trust me, the week of the 14th, the week of the 21st, you don't want to miss those, right? Again, to your point, whole denominations have been birthed out of this second half of the book of 1 Corinthians because of different takes on spirit, whether it's the resurrection or whether it's the spiritual gifts, right? You don't want to miss what's coming up in these next 3 weeks.
You do not, because it like you said, it has spawned denominations. It spawned arguments. It spawned salvation. And are you actually saved? I mean, people have had those arguments about the 2.5 chapters that he's going to touch. So yes, do not miss those. They're going to be fantastic.
All right. And then we're going to close out the month, the last Sunday of the month, one of our favorite Sundays all year long. Young guns, the teenagers, the now, not the next generation, the now generation taking over on the 28th. So, and they will be tying their, BC or Carson, you've told me they don't have to, tie their message to the Corinthian series, but they will be taking a verse. And so it will kind of all connect at one level or another.
It will connect, and I've had the pleasure of reading some of their revisions. Y'all better buckle up and hold on. That's all I got to say. Buckle up and hold on. It's some truth's about to be coming out with these students, man. It's going to be awesome.
Nice. All right, so let's wrap it up with this one question. We get into the second half of the book here. Chapter 11, starts talking about some of the ways things are happening in their worship service, and Paul's correcting them again as a parent he loves, going back to that. So what is up with women having to wear head coverings when they pray in church, right? We don't do that at South Point. Obviously, we have women up on stage almost every week, whether it's Katie or one of the other band leaders who will say a prayer in the middle of a song, or whoever comes out for the transition. And, a lot of times those are women leading those prayers, and we don't have them wearing head coverings. So why did Paul give this command, and why don't we follow it today?
I love it. So everything is context. Everything is so important in context. And so when Paul was encouraging this church, one of the biggest issues they had was they were struggling with the Greeks that were living there that had a culture, the temple of Aphrodite that comes from the Greek, the Roman belief, and the pagan beliefs of no resurrection or resurrection, right? And so the same thing came into the way they ate food, the same way that they drank, the same way that they partied, the same belief system. And there were so many that did not wear headdresses, and they did not wear scarves or hairdresses. And that was a symbol in Corinth of promiscuity, that they were potentially more open to affairs. And it showed a lively, wild lifestyle. And so just like Pastor Craig said at the very beginning, everybody in Corinth that became part of this church, and the majority of them, they added to their faith, but they never subtracted. Paul was giving them encouragement to say, so you don't have to have the conversations, wear this hairdress, wear this head covering. I'll put it this way. I think we still do this in the early church, and I think we do it now in the modern church. We have a level of modesty and a level of cultural acceptance that we have kind of made unknown or standard in the church. It's not spoken of,
Yeah.
right? But you aren't going to walk into church in a loincloth, most likely, right? You are typically, when someone's speaking, you'll try to be a little bit more silent.
Yeah.
And so the same cultural issues that we struggle with were the same things they struggle with, but they were trying to create a separation that made sense to their culture. The other thing with it, and it goes into the head coverings even more so, there is a level of this where if you think about the spiritual submission, if you submit in a head covering and you cover yourself, you are also submitting to what could be under that head covering to God. So if you stand down and say, hey, I am submitting to you, right? There's a level of I'm going to get lower than you, right? I'm going to put myself at a lower position. And so the ability to say, I'm going to cover up my hair, I'm going to cover up my head, I'm going to do whatever I can so that I can, one, not be a stumbling block to other people. Two, so I can encourage other people that, hey, this is how far my commitment goes. And even three, that I trust God and it doesn't make any sense to me. We do it all the time. Prayer is the most beautiful and wonderful thing that we have with our communication with God, right?
Yep.
God does not care about how you pray. He cares about the heart in which you pray. If you talk to God like you're talking to a roommate, you're talking to a father, you're talking to a wife, God cares about where your heart and your intentions are. And so the cultural part of it is so important. But again, like modern churches and like everything, this has been interpreted and taken to, this has been interpreted even to women not having the level of authority over men, because men were not asked to put head coverings on, even though men were not as
again, the denomination I grew up in. I mean, I'll just call it out, right?
But it's again, it was the culture. If we lived in a place now, and again, I think if you've never been or never researched what it's like to be a Christian across the United States and then outside of the United States, there are things you cannot do in foreign countries, whether because it's illegal or because it's just not culturally appropriate. Right?
Yeah.
You do the same thing. And so what Paul was recognizing was, hey, there's a lot of promiscuity. There's a lot of this. There's a lot of that. I'm going to give you something that I think will help you, and it will defend you against these. And there is scripture after scripture that is referenced that Paul uses to back this up. And it's just a way to observe that God is the authority and the order. I trust you, God. It's a level of submission that I believe in. And I think all of us once in a while would, if we would, and I think it's true now, how many, especially if you go to an old church, if you walk in with a hat, and how many people just like, they get real wired up. Why? Because the ancient church wore hats, hair covers, hairdresses, scarves out of total respect, because they had no intention of wanting anybody to feel like they were going to be affiliated with these other areas. Because if you live in Sin City, that's what you have to deal with.
Yep. Good stuff. Well, hey, thanks you everybody for joining us today. Again, probably a little longer than we've typically gone on these midweeks, but I appreciate you guys tuning in. You've heard what's coming up. Again, stuff you do not want to miss.
You don't want to miss it.
Any closing words?
No, guys, it's been awesome. I can't wait for more of these. I hope y'all are enjoying them. So seriously, if you have questions, put them in the chat, because we really do want you guys to grow. If there's things you don't understand, I'm not going to tell you I know all the answers, and I don't think Mack knows all the answers, but we will give you the wisdom that we have gained, because it's great to hear other opinions and other thoughts. So let us know what you think. Exactly.
So we're going to close out. Have a happy, safe 4th of July. Yes. Enjoy your long weekend. Hope to see everybody at South Point, whether it's in person or online, this Sunday.
Yeah, guys, can't wait to see you there.
All right. Everybody have a great week.